You know what surprises me every spring? People spend money on garden decorations while throwing away things that could become some of the most beautiful and useful pieces in the entire yard. I see old buckets going to the dump, broken chairs getting burned, rusty watering cans tossed aside, cracked wheelbarrows abandoned behind sheds. And every time I see it, I think the same thing. Most gardeners are throwing away things that could make their garden look like something out of a storybook while helping plants grow better at the same time. The truth is, many of the best garden decorations are not bought in stores. They come from things that nobody wants anymore, things that sat untouched in a shed for 10 years, things covered in dust, things people call junk. I learned this many years ago from an older neighbor who never seemed to throw anything away. At first I thought he was simply saving old rubbish. Then, one summer I walked through his garden and could not believe what I was seeing. An old bicycle covered in flowers, a broken ladder turned into a vertical vegetable tower, an ancient metal bed frame transformed into one of the most beautiful climbing bean supports I had ever seen. The whole place looked different from every other garden around it. It felt alive. It felt personal. And the amazing thing was that almost none of it cost him anything. Since then, I started looking at old objects differently. Instead of asking whether something should be thrown away, I started asking a different question. What could this become? That one question completely changed the way I decorate my garden and even parts of my home. Today, I want to show you 15 of my favorite ideas. Some are surprisingly practical. Some help vegetables grow better. Some attract attention the moment visitors walk into the yard. And a few, honestly, look like something from a fantasy movie, even though they are built from things most people would throw away without a second thought. The first few ideas are incredibly simple and almost free, but one of the decorations near the end still makes visitors stop and stare every time they see it, and it all started with an object that was heading straight for the trash. The first thing I want you to do is stop looking at old containers as useless junk. Some of the most practical garden decorations I have ever made started with ordinary buckets and watering cans that nobody wanted anymore. Most people see a rusty bucket and think it belongs in the scrap pile. I see a future flower tower. One of my favorite projects takes an old metal bucket with a few holes drilled into the sides. I fill it with soil and plant flowers not only on top, but through the side holes as well. By midsummer, the entire thing turns into a colorful column covered in blooms from top to bottom. It looks expensive, but costs almost nothing. Right next to it, I often place old watering cans. Many people have one sitting in a shed with a cracked handle or a small leak. Instead of throwing it away, I fill it with soil and trailing flowers. When those flowers start spilling over the edges, it creates the illusion of a stream of living color pouring out of the spout. Visitors always ask where I bought it. They never believe it was made from something headed for the trash. Another forgotten item is the old wooden chair. Most people have one somewhere with a broken seat. Years ago, someone showed me a simple trick. Remove what remains of the seat and place a flower pot inside the opening. Suddenly, that useless chair becomes a garden centerpiece. The older and more weathered the chair looks, the better the effect becomes. But here is where it gets even more useful. An old chair can also support climbing cucumbers or small beans. Few people do this anymore. The plants naturally wrap around the frame, and by summer the entire chair disappears under green leaves and vegetables. Then there are old drawers from broken dressers. Most people never think about them. I stack 3 or 4 at different angles and fill them with herbs. Basil on one level, parsley on another, thyme on the next. It becomes a vertical herb garden that takes very little space and creates a unique look. The best part is that everything stays within arm's reach when cooking. These are simple projects. They require almost no money and very little skill, but they completely change how a garden feels. And what I'm about to show you next starts with something many people have rusting behind a garage right now. When transformed correctly, it becomes one of the most eye-catching structures in the entire yard. One of the decorations that gets the most attention in my garden started with an old bicycle that had not moved in years. The tires were flat, the chain was rusty. The paint was fading away. Most people would have taken it to the dump or sold it for scrap. Instead, I cleaned it just enough to make it safe to handle and placed it near the entrance of the garden. Then I attached old baskets to the front and rear and filled them with flowers. A few months later, it looked like something from another world. The flowers spilled over every side. Butterflies gathered around it. People stopped to take photographs. The bicycle itself became almost invisible beneath the plants. What makes this idea special is that it works in almost any yard, no matter how small. But if you want something even more useful, there is another forgotten object that deserves attention. Old ladders. I learned this trick many years ago from a gardener who hated wasting space. He took a wooden ladder that could no longer be used safely and leaned it against a fence. Instead of climbing it, he turned every step into a planting shelf. Small pots of herbs sat on the upper levels. Strawberries filled the middle sections. Decorative flowers covered the lower part. The result looked beautiful while producing food at the same time. Most people never realize how valuable vertical growing can be until they try it. Another forgotten treasure is the old wheelbarrow. Sometimes the tire is damaged or the metal tray is rusted through. That does not matter. Fill it with soil, and suddenly it becomes a raised flower bed. What I like about this project is that it can be moved around whenever needed. If one area of the garden looks empty, the wheelbarrow can become the focal point. If another area needs color, it can be relocated there instead. Then there is one project that always surprises people: an old metal bed frame. Years ago, almost every home had one somewhere in storage. Today, most sit unused in garages and barns. Yet these frames make incredible supports for climbing vegetables, cucumbers, pole beans, decorative vines, even climbing roses. Once covered with greenery, they create an archway that looks far more expensive than it actually is. Few people use them anymore, which is exactly why they stand out. But what comes next may be my favorite idea of all because it combines beauty and function in a way that most visitors never expect. And it starts with something so ordinary that people usually walk right past it without seeing any potential at all. One of the most useful decorations I ever added to my garden came from a pile of old glass jars and bottles that had been collecting dust for years. Most people save a few and eventually throw the rest away. I almost did the same thing until an older gardener showed me a trick that I still use today. He hung colored bottles upside down along a fence line. When sunlight passed through them, the entire area seemed to glow. During the evening, they reflected light in ways that made the garden feel completely different. It cost him nothing but a little time. Then he showed me something even smarter. He used larger glass bottles as miniature watering reservoirs beside young plants. A small opening near the base allowed water to slowly seep into the soil. So, while the bottles looked decorative, they were also helping keep moisture near the roots during hot weather. That is exactly the kind of idea I love. Beautiful and practical at the same time. Another forgotten item that deserves a second life is the old tire. I know many people do not like the look of tires sitting around a yard. Neither do I. But when painted and stacked correctly, they become something completely different. I have seen old tires transformed into flower towers that looked almost like giant garden sculptures. Different colors, different heights, flowers spilling from every level. They become impossible to ignore. A similar idea works with old metal tubs and wash basins. Years ago, nearly every household had them. Today, many sit unused in barns and sheds. Filled with flowers or herbs, they become raised planters that are easy to maintain and easy on the back. For people over 50, that alone can make gardening more enjoyable. Then there is a project that always starts conversations: old teapots and kettles. Most people never imagine putting them outside. Yet when mounted on a post or attached to a fence, they become unique flower holders. Some gardeners even turn them into small bird feeders. The effect is simple but memorable. Little details like that make a garden feel personal instead of looking like every other yard in the neighborhood. What fascinates me most is how quickly these projects change the atmosphere of a space. The garden begins telling a story. Every object has a past and now it has a new purpose. But the next ideas take things even further because they start creating structures that almost look magical. And one of them uses a common household object that most people have not touched in years. Now, I want to show you a few projects that create the strongest reactions from visitors because they look far more complicated than they really are. One of them starts with old umbrellas. Most people have at least one broken umbrella somewhere in the house. The fabric may be torn and the mechanism may not work anymore. Instead of throwing it away, open it fully and secure it upside down in the garden. Fill the inside with lightweight soil and trailing flowers. As the plants grow, they spill over the edges and the entire umbrella begins to look like a giant floating flower basket. I remember the first time I saw this done. From a distance, it almost looked unreal. Another forgotten object is the old bird cage. Even if the door is broken or the metal is rusting, it can become one of the most attractive hanging planters in the yard. Place small flower pots inside, or allow climbing plants to weave through the bars. After a few months, the cage becomes a living sculpture. Very few people use this method today, which is exactly why it stands out so much. Then there are old wooden crates. These are often left in garages for years without any purpose. I like stacking them at different heights to create planting displays. One crate may hold herbs, another flowers, another strawberries. The uneven arrangement creates depth and makes a small area appear much larger. An older gardener showed me this many years ago and I still use it because it works almost everywhere. One mistake many people make is trying to create decorations that are too perfect. Old garden projects actually look better when they keep some of their age and character. A little rust, some faded paint, a weathered surface. Those details make the garden feel warm and lived in. Another project that people love. After all these years of gardening, I have noticed something interesting. The people who create the most beautiful gardens are rarely the people who spend the most money. More often, they are the people who learn to see possibilities where others see waste. That old bucket is no longer just a bucket. That broken chair is no longer just a broken chair. That rusty bicycle or forgotten ladder is no longer something taking up space in a shed. It becomes part of a story. And every time you walk through your garden, you see that story growing. What I love most about these projects is that they do more than save money. They make the garden feel personal. Anyone can buy the same decoration from a store, but nobody else will have your exact flower bicycle. Nobody else will have your herb ladder or your flower umbrella, or your living wall made from old drawers. Those things belong only to your garden. They reflect your creativity and your experience. Many years ago, I used to think a beautiful garden required expensive materials and perfect planning. Today, I know better. Some of the most memorable things in my yard came from objects that were only a few days away from being thrown out. That realization changed everything. Now, before I throw anything away, I stop for a moment and ask a simple question. Could this become something useful? Very often the answer is yes. Sometimes it becomes a planter. Sometimes it becomes a support for vegetables. Sometimes it becomes a decoration that makes people smile. And sometimes it becomes something completely unexpected. That is the fun of it. You never know where the next idea will come from. So before you clean out the garage or empty that old shed, take one more look at what is inside. There may be materials for your next favorite garden project sitting there right now. And the best part is that many of these ideas can be started this weekend without spending a single dollar. Once you begin seeing old objects differently, you may never look at them the same way again. In fact, there is one more forgotten item that most people overlook completely, and what it can become in a garden might be the most surprising transformation of all. But that is a story for another day. Involves old window frames. Instead of throwing them away, I place them among flower beds or attach them to fences. Climbing plants grow around them and eventually through them. The frame becomes a decorative feature that adds height and visual interest without taking up much space. These ideas already transform an ordinary yard into something special. But the next group of projects moves into territory that almost feels like fantasy. They are still simple. They still cost almost nothing. Yet, they create the kind of effect that makes people stop walking and stare for a moment because they cannot quite believe what they are seeing. The last few ideas are the ones that make people ask the same question every time. How did you make that? The funny part is that the answer is usually very simple. One of my favorites starts with old metal chains, worn tools, and pieces of scrap that seem completely useless. Instead of throwing them away, I hang them from a sturdy branch or wooden frame and create moving garden ornaments. When a light breeze arrives, they gently move and catch sunlight from different angles. Some gardeners add old spoons, keys, or small metal objects. The result looks surprisingly artistic and costs absolutely nothing. Another project that always attracts attention uses old tree stumps. Most people see a stump as something ugly that should be removed. I see a natural pedestal. A hollow section in the top can be filled with soil and flowers. Moss can be encouraged to grow along the sides. Small decorative plants can spill over the edges. After a season or two, it looks like something that has been growing there naturally for decades. Then there is one project that children and adults both seem to love. Old drawers mounted vertically on a fence. Each drawer is painted a different color or left weathered depending on the style you prefer. Flowers grow from one, herbs from another, strawberries from the next. The entire wall becomes a living display. Few people do this, and that makes it feel unique. Another forgotten treasure is old kitchen colanders. Most households have one that has been replaced long ago. Because they already contain drainage holes, they make excellent hanging baskets. Add trailing flowers, and within weeks nobody even realizes they started life in a kitchen cabinet. One of the most impressive ideas I have ever seen involved several old mirrors placed carefully among plants and flowers. The mirrors reflected greenery and light in unexpected ways. Certain corners of the garden suddenly appeared larger than they actually were. Some views seemed to continue beyond the fence line. It almost felt like stepping into another place. The best part is that many of these projects require little more than cleaning an object and giving it a second purpose. No expensive materials, no special tools, no complicated construction. Yet the effect can completely transform how a garden feels. And before we finish, there is one final lesson I learned from all these projects. It may be the most valuable idea of all because it changes the way you look at every forgotten object you own.